This video is going to be a little bit longer than you guys are used to, so just bear with me. We're going to be talking about the Spanish-American War. So in order for us to talk about the Spanish-American War, we need to start in the beginning and then obviously follow through on the effects of it. So that goes all the way back to dealing with imperialism and its reasons. We need to talk about the United States' position in the world in terms of a sea power, annexing Hawaii, what is the Pan-American Union, obviously the Spanish-American War, yellow journalism, and then finally we're going to be talking about the U.S.'s role in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So this time period is known as the Age of Imperialism, and that is when you had rich and powerful countries that would take control economically and politically weaker countries or specific regions. Think about England and the 13 colonies. It's very similar to that. Here is a map of Africa, and you can see it's color-coded to the different countries that were colonized or controlled by various European countries. So you can see that blue, that France had a huge role in it, and so did the UK. And this is a map of Asia. So by 1914, European countries controlled a lot of Africa and Asia. Why did European countries colonize or imperialize Africa and Asia? The first reason and the most important reason is for money. They wanted the raw materials and the consumers for their products. If they had the raw materials, they could make more things, which means that they could sell more things, including selling things back to the people that they are actually controlling. So for example, if you have something like oil in Africa, they're going to take the oil, they're going to turn it into a useful product, and then they will sell it back to Africans or to Asians, to wherever it is that we're talking about. This political cartoon, you can see how you have 5 different countries on the top half of the cartoon and how they're kind of looking, you know, down, and they're looking burdened, and they're not looking like they're standing tall like on the bottom half. So the first half is before the U.S. Entered into their lives and started to control or have some sort of effect on their politics, and the second half is after the U.S. was done with it. So you can see the Philippines has Spanish oppression on its back, but after the U.S. gets involved in the Philippines, he's standing up tall, he looks clean, he looks proud, he looks strong. 2 other reasons for imperialism was the fact that Europeans wanted to spread Christianity. It was their duty to convert people to Christianity and help backward people as they saw fit. And it was also a competition. You wanted to be the most powerful country in Europe. Being powerful included being rich, being wealthy, having a lot of land. So they wanted to get to an area before their competitors did. So if we're talking about the U.S. expanding into other regions of the world, that also has to do with foreign trade. Now, this captain pictured over here, Captain Alfred Mahan, thought that the future prosperity of the U.S. depended on foreign trade. And in order to trade successfully, you would need a large navy to protect your trading vessels, and that would also require you having naval bases throughout the world. As a result, to protect the foreign trading of the U.S. Navy grew exponentially, and it became known as the Great White Fleet. One important gain during this expansion was the islands of Hawaii. In 1875, Hawaii allowed the U.S. to use the seaport of Pearl Harbor. Eventually, U.S. influence grew in Hawaii, and wealthy planters forced the Hawaiian king to adopt a new constitution that would actually give more control to the American planters that were there than to the actual king. So foreigners like Sanford Dole was allowed to vote, but native Hawaiians that didn't own land couldn't vote. So at this time, Hawaii is its own kingdom. It has its own constitution, its own government, and wealthy Americans were there with huge plantations making profit. A few years later, after that king dies and you have a new leader, the queen decides that they're going to become independent, and she tries to restore Hawaii's independence from the U.S. The attempt for Hawaiian independence is not successful. U.S. Marines force the queen to surrender at gunpoint, and she doesn't do this on her own free will. She does this because she is forced to, and as she says in the quote that's listed here, "I do this under protest," but this is how the U.S. acquires Hawaii. This is the cover of a magazine after the queen surrenders to the Marines, and you can see how the Marines are holding her up, and she's holding a newspaper or a piece of paper that says "Scandalous Government." After the Queen surrenders, Stanford Dole actually is the one that becomes the temporary president of the Republic of Hawaii. This is before Hawaii fully became annexed to the U.S. and was still kind of considered independent. While Stanford Dole is the temporary president, President Grover Cleveland here in the U.S. is an anti-imperialist. He doesn't support this going out to other countries or other regions and then taking control. So he actually refused to annex Hawaii. However, when the next president comes into office, President McKinley, he annexed Hawaii in 1898, and it officially becomes the 50th state in 1959. Now, while all this is going on, a group of nations is forming, and it's known as the Pan American Union. The purpose of this group is to solve the problems of strictly the Western Hemisphere. One of the issues that are going on at the moment is the fact that Spain controls Puerto Rico and Cuba, and many people, including this Puerto Rican poet here, was in favor of Puerto Rican and Cuban independence from Spain. This Cuban patriot also believed in the need for Cuban independence, and he actually died fighting for the cause that he believed in. So the Spanish controlled Cuba, and the Spanish governor that was in charge was extremely harsh against the native Cubans. He would detain thousands and thousands of Cubans for no reason, or if they went against the Spanish government, and he's also responsible for killing over 100,000 innocent people. Now, the U.S. sympathized with the Cuban desire for freedom from Spain, so they actually supported this idea. People found out about the Spanish government's cruelty in Cuba thanks to newspapers like Joseph Pulitzer's World and William Randolph Hearst's The Journal. And they would compete to get the most grisly stories or to capture the public's attention. And this is actually an example of their newspapers, this particular one, The Journal, and their headlines. You can see how huge they are and how that would just capture anybody's attention. Congress declares war, call to duty, war. So it would capture people's attention. The political cartoons that they printed in the newspaper portrayed the Spanish as bloodthirsty or as evil people. And you can see over here, this gorilla-looking man is supposed to represent Spain, and you can see how he's bloodthirsty. He has blood on his hands, on his knife. Joseph Pulitzer once said that if you supply me with the photos, I'll supply you with the war. So these political cartoons were printed in these newspapers, and then they would add these crazy headlines to rile people up and to get them all excited. Now, President McKinley did not want to go to war with Spain. He was very hesitant about entering into war with Spain, and he tried to avoid it. However, he was aware of the uprisings that were happening in Cuba against Spain, so he sent the battleship Maine to Cuba to protect the American citizens that were there and to protect American property. An explosion destroys the USS Maine, killing 260 U.S. sailors. After the USS Maine was destroyed, Americans blamed Spain, even though it was never actually proven. And on April 25, 1898, Congress declares war on Spain. In actuality, years later, it comes to find out there was a fire in the engine room, and that is why the Maine exploded. It had nothing to do with Spain. But the explosion and the yellow journalism that you're seeing right here, Congress declares war, riled people up, including President McKinley, including Congress, and war was declared on Spain. And the famous saying that comes out of this is, remember the Maine, as the reasoning for going into war and to honor the 260 U.S. sailors that were killed. This here is a picture of U.S. soldiers, and they're actually in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, but we'll talk about why they're in the Philippines in a moment. So declaring war on Spain didn't just mean dealing with the Spanish in Cuba. It meant dealing with the Spanish everywhere, and that also included the Philippine Islands. So the U.S. Commodore Dewey actually defeated the Spanish Navy in the Philippines after only 6 hours of battle, and that is where you get that picture from. And Dewey becomes this national hero, and he has songs written after him and posters created after his epic win. Eventually, the Filipino rebels, with the assistance of the U.S. military, is able to capture the Philippine capital of Manila. Now, going back to Cuba, this is when you have the rise of Theodore Roosevelt. He led a volunteer regiment known as the Rough Riders to victory on the famous Battle of the San Juan Hill. And you can see this here is a picture of Theodore Roosevelt with his Rough Riders on top of that hill. Teddy Roosevelt gains popularity and gains fame with this Rough Riders and this victory during the Spanish-American War. And you can see here is a poster that is promoting a movie based on this. Eventually, Spain surrenders after most of their naval fleet was destroyed 2 days following the victory of Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. So this was a very short war. In fact, many people don't even remember the Spanish-American War. So what actually did the U.S. gain from it? Well, one, Cuba was given its independence. Spain no longer controlled it. The U.S. was given control of Guam, the Philippines, and of Puerto Rico. And in order to help Spain out a little bit for losing much of their land, they were given $20 million as some sort of way to appease them. This drawing here depicts how the American eagle is now spreading its wings and taking over a variety of lands. And you can see the different lands that we had some role or some impact in. And here's Uncle Sam being sized up for a new suit. We were now getting all of these extra lands that we were controlling or had some role economically or politically in. So we had to get a bigger suit because we were growing. And this drawing over here depicts how people from around the world are going to be celebrating the 4th of July. Not just in America, but it's going to be celebrated in the Philippines, and in Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam. And in this political cartoon, you can see how the kids in the back, now Uncle Sam is a teacher, the kids in the back are reading quietly. They look like they're well composed and they're behaving. The kids in the front look like they're scared, and those are supposed to represent the newly acquired lands, almost as if, yes, you're stuck in this classroom with us, but I don't really want to be here mentality. Officially ending the war is the Teller Amendment, which gives Cuba its independence in 1899, and it officially ends the Spanish-American War. However, the U.S. forced Cuba to sign the Plate Amendment, which limited Cuba's right to make treaties with other countries and to borrow money. It also allowed the U.S. to intervene in Cuba if they needed to or they saw fit, and it gave the U.S. control of the naval base in Guantanamo Bay, which we still own and still have control of today. In 1900, Puerto Rico gained their own government with the Foraker Act. However, the U.S. was still able to intervene, and with that, the Puerto Ricans were given American citizenship in 1917. After the U.S. helps the Filipino rebels in their country take back control from Spain, they were upset, the Filipinos were upset that the U.S. was refusing to grant them independence. The U.S. still wanted control on some level. So the rebels now turn against the U.S. and they have a mini war. The war officially ends in 1901 when the rebel leader is captured, and you had 4,000 Americans that were killed during this war, in addition to 220,000 Filipinos. The Philippines were finally given their independence by the U.S. in 1946. This cartoon here depicts the U.S. trying to get their hands on the true history of the Philippine War, and how you have a man that's stopping them and has it under lock and key so that the U.S. can't manipulate what actually happened in the Philippines. And then this political cartoon shows how the U.S. kind of got all tangled up around the tree of imperialism to say that even though they were trying to take control, it wasn't so easy. Things got a little bit muddy, a little bit chaotic for the U.S. With that being said, we are finally done with this video, so you should be able to answer the following 7 questions. What is imperialism, and then what are its reasons for it? Why and how did America grow, and I know there's a typo there, grow to become the seat of power? How did the U.S. annex Hawaii, and then how did the native Hawaiians react? What is the Pan American Union? How did the Spanish-American War start, and then what are its effects? What is yellow journalism, and how did it impact the Spanish-American War? And then finally, what is the U.S.'s role in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines? So make sure you're able to answer these questions, and I will see you guys tomorrow in class. Don't forget about your blog as well.